Matthew Trumm, and today I'm going to give a presentation I'm calling Large Scale Restoration through Small Scale Participation. So I'm an hour north of Sacramento in the foothills of the Sierra Nevadas, right on the edge of the Sacramento Valley, and I've lived in Oroville for about 7.5 years. And before that, I was up in a little town called Berry Creek, which is just half hour east of Lake Oroville. You might know Lake Oroville from the Oroville Dam and the Oroville Dam Spillway. We're like one of the largest earthen dams in the world, and it almost we had a spillway almost collapse in 2017 during that big El Nino event that we had here, and 250,000 people were given evacuation orders. So you might have seen this on the news for that one. And if you didn't see that, then you definitely know this area for the town of Paradise. Of course, that burned to the ground in the 2018 mega fire called the Camp Fire. And so we're going to be talking about that. It's all in the area generally in Butte County. And so this is where I've spent the last 15 years of my life. Chico, Oroville, Berry Creek, and I grew up in the Bay Area, but found home to be out here in the more rural areas, and just really love it out here. This is my business, Treetop Permaculture. You can visit my website, treetoppermaculture.org, to see what I've worked on. I won't get into too much of my journey today, but I was trained by Jeff Lott, went through his permaculture design course. It's my gateway to permaculture. And in 2015, I worked for Dr. Elaine Ingham. I was hired for her research farm up here in Berry Creek. And I worked with Penny Livingston on the mainframe design stuff, and was put through Elaine's composting methods and research methods, and really just started to dive deep into the permaculture and soil world. Started a school garden program and a big grant program for the local community park at one point, and been doing a lot of work in local food. Started a food co-op in Oroville, and started my education business. I teach certification courses for permaculture design and other workshops in the community. Put through quite a few students through the programs. Started school garden programs and so many other things. So you can check out my website to see all of that. And my presentation of last year's RFuture gives a little bit more also about my journey and how I created, a local permaculture network here in Oroville, and several businesses that sprouted from it all, and just an incredible, abundant world from like literally not knowing anybody. Within 3 to 5 years, it was like a whole new world emerged, and just nothing but opportunities ever since. Along my journey, I watched this documentary called Green Gold, and y'all might know this gentleman here, John D. Liu, and we know him mostly for his work, documentary that he did in his coverage of the Loess Plateau rehabilitation project in China, where the Chinese government looked at a area that was the cradle of Chinese civilization that was degraded over historic time, and they decided that it was so bad that they needed to do something about it. It was causing dust storms in Beijing. It was causing the Yellow River to be yellow, and the just massive amounts of erosion and degradation. The local people were, impoverished, from this situation, and it was really hard to make a living out there. It was really rough, and they decided to go ahead and put a bunch of money and work with the local people to restore this area. And so it was like the largest land restoration project at the time, in human history that we know of. 650,000 square kilometers that they did certain principles, work like we do in permaculture. How do we plant trees on the heavy slopes? How do we slow and sink water, infiltrate water, collect organic matter, so we can bring the life back into these areas. And within 10 years, massive amounts of change happened. And within 20 years, we've seen a whole transformation in the region, and the economies had gone up. And anyways, it was like this aha moment, when I watched that film, and many of you watched the film Hope in a Changing Climate or Green Gold. They both touched on this work and other things like this. And Jeff Lawton was in Green Gold, and with his work in the Green in the Desert Project out in Jordan. Just amazing stuff, and still happening to this day. But it was like, wow, we can restore large-scale degraded ecosystems. This is something interesting. And, this was something I watched over the years and so forth. So fast forward 2018, I'm sitting in my house on the computer looking at a forum. I see John Liu on this forum talking about this thing I never heard of called ecosystem restoration camps. And, at the time I've been the peak of my permaculture world, and all these things have been happening. And, I'm like, hey, I'm going to send John a little bio and see if he gets it. I don't know. And within minutes, John calls me, tells me, Matthew, he's 2:00 in the morning in China. He's got a guitar in his lap and a glass of wine. And he goes, we need to work together. I'm forming a council in California. I think California is going to be where this movement is going to start. It's called Ecosystem Restoration Camps. I'd like you to be on the council. Super excited. Of course, I say yes. This is in late October of 2018, and ecosystem restoration camps. Like, what is it? So I had to look it up and hear what he was saying. And one of the videos that will come into play here real quick that I watched was John explaining what the restoration camps were to a group of people. And at the end, he said, let's gather around the campfire and restore paradise. Of course, a literal campfire and paradise of the earth. And 2 weeks later, the campfire destroyed the town of Paradise. And it didn't hit me immediately, but as I'm evacuating Oroville, because it went from Paradise to Berry Creek to Oroville, and my buddy who lived in Paradise had to evacuate down to Oroville, and then I said, okay, you can go up to Berry Creek, and then he went up there, and then he got an evacuation order there, then he came to Oroville, then we got an evacuation order there, and I'm driving, and we're talking about, we can't run from this. There's nowhere to hide from, what's happening around us, right? And we just had the big flood in 2017, the year before that. And it's like hell or high water, we can't run from this. And boom, it hit me like a thunderbolt, John's words, gather around the campfire, restore paradise. And I was like, I knew that I was meant to do something here, and I had to learn about what's happening here. And I called John, and I said, I need to start a restoration camp for paradise. He said, I'll support you however I can. And that's when the Campfire Restoration Project was born. And we became the first ecosystem restoration camp in the United States, first disaster response restoration camp in the world, and creating models for post-fire restoration and regeneration, and amazing stuff, and doing a lot of incredible work, creating demonstration sites and models, and educating the community, and I'm doing all this work. And I'm deep in it, and in 2020, 2 years later, another big fire. From 150,000 acres in the campfire, now we had a 350,000 acre fire. And it destroyed my little town of Berry Creek that my family owned a house there, and I grew up and I lived there for 8.5 years off grid in a little cabin. Our little home and everything burned to the ground. This was our off grid little house, and this was afterwards. Like many people who are watching this, and especially if you live in California or Australia or in um, the Mediterranean area and Europe, you've dealt with fire, you've seen these kinds of things. It started really for us. It was like Santa Rosa fire was like the first, like what we call a mega fire, kind of in that in our area, and then after that, I mean, the campfire, and then it was just like just like boom, 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 just mega fires everywhere. These wind-driven mega fires. What is going on here? I had to get to the bottom of it. This was down by our creek before the fire. Good group of friends. This is the same place after. This is something unlike anything we've ever seen before. And I remembered back to a conversation I had with John the first day I met him when he came to California in February of 2019, telling me about something he's working on called the Holy Grail Restoration. And it was talking about the Sinai Peninsula and how, this place, looks like it's always been desert, but actually it was an abundant, fertile, amazing place. It was called the land of milk and honey. It had agriculture and 7 rivers. I mean, look at all these river systems that used to flow through here. You can see the data, and they started to study that. He was working with a couple of people out there working on a big rehabilitation project, and they were studying pollen samples and things like that. And what hit me when he was talking about, he was saying how what they've discovered is the pollen samples had changed, and it showed the winds had shifted at some point, and went from a condensation driven wind because of the forest and all the life there pulling moisture in, and coming from a certain area to an evaporative driven wind. It changed the whole thing, changed the whole climate for that region, and started this domino effect, they believe, that contributed to the whole desertification of this entire area. And this is the same story we see time and time again in historical past. This is what happened in the Loess Plateau. It's what happened in the Middle East. It's what happened here. It's what happened in parts of Africa. It's what's happening in Europe. And it's what's happening in California. But California, what's so important to understand here is this area has only been colonized for 150 years, whereas Europe and these other, places, Sinai, Middle East, were thousands and thousands of years, like maybe 10,000 years it took to get them to that state. But now we have fossil fuel, and boy, did we ramp it up. And I immediately went to a map and I started looking upwind from the fires, and I started to think about like what would have caused this. And I realized that these were areas that were getting highly degraded through logging practices over the previous 10, 15 years. And I just was like, wow, could it be that the removal of key ecosystems actually created the drought, created the wind and evaporation and everything that created these mega fires? And so what I'm going to show you guys here is a time lapse of this area. So particularly, this is Lake Oroville here. So this is Butte County, and a couple things on this map. So this dot right here is the town of Polga, where the campfire began. This is the town of Paradise. This represents Berry Creek, and this represents Feather Falls. The upper line here is basically just illustrating the edge of the high desert. This is the high desert, Nevada. Okay, and then on, on are the plains. And to the west, the southwest, you start to see the high desert transition into the forest. And here's, the Sierra Nevada mountain range and, the heavy forest that blocks this high desert from the Central Valley. Okay. And back in 1984, you can see here, there's some obvious logging that's happened. Here's some here, a little bit here and here, and we did have some fires. I think in this area is historically always burned because of its location, but I know it was nothing like these mega fires, but yeah, a little bit of logging here and there. And of course the high desert is always having some activities in this area of ups and downs, droughts and things like that. But for the most part, this forest had remained relatively the same for a while. Still degraded. We'll talk about that later. But watch what happens from 1984 to 2022. We're going to go in 10-year increments. So I'm going to go back 1984, 1994, 2004, 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020 shows the campfire burn scar now, 2021, and 2022, that's showing the Bear Fire or North Complex Fire burn scar. And if you would have gone one more year forward, you would see the Dixie Fire burn scar here. Okay. I'm going to go back one more time and let's start to really see this picture here again unfold. So let's first look at the paradise, the campfire. Okay. So you already had a lot of the winds coming from the high desert through here. Okay. And that's part of the reason why this area here is historically degraded. There's a lot of granite rock, it's geology in a lot of ways contributing to this and some of these areas, but it's a corridor, right? It's a wind corridor from the high desert, and it's always created some sort of a, wind influence into this area. But the difference is you still had quite a bit of mountain and forest to buffer those dry winds and cool it down a bit, okay? Add moisture back into the area. And let's pay attention to this region right here as we go forward. Okay, 94, they started logging. 2004, look at that. 94 to 2004 really opened it up. And then 2014, I mean, my God, look at that. 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, and boom, 2020. Now, these years, particularly from 1990, I would say actually about 2000, okay, to 2018, this is when the drought was happening big time in this area and many others. Now, you got to realize that this is not just happening in Butte County in this area. This is happening all the way up and down the Sierra Nevada mountains. But we're looking at this, and I started to plug in the wind data. I started to plug in the humidity data for those years, and you can see a direct correlation from the extraction of the logging to the wind change, to the humidity change. And what I'm trying to tell you right now is that I think we can prove that these extraction events were directly linked to the drought and directly linked to the mega fires. It dried it out, it desiccated life, dried everything out, dried the biology out, dried the fungal networks out, it just desiccated everything, created a brittle, dry scenario, and then all it took was one spark. And it was PG&E, happened to be in this particular time with campfire, or in the case of 2020 with the bear fire, it was lightning. It doesn't matter the source of ignition, it's the conditions that we're looking at here. And again, now focus just to the east, upwind from Berry Creek and Feather Falls from 1984. Look at that. You're opening up a corridor to the high desert. And let's zoom out a little bit. Yeah, 2005, 2022, 2005, 2022. Cumulatively in 5 years, 62% of Butte County had burned. 1,400,000 acres burned in 5 years. We just happen to be in a critical place. California, this amazing, beautiful, diverse, fertile place, and we're seeing it 150 years after colonization. Imagine what it was like before, okay? We're looking at this California, think, oh, it's amazing, it's beautiful, it's infinite. We'll never have any, it's always going to be that way. I'm just trying to have you think about this. Look at what we're sitting right next to. We have a thin strip of forest buffering the Sacramento Valley. This incredible, most food production, highest food production in the world. I mean, and then just this little strip of forest next to the Pacific Ocean. These two forests are what's creating this moderated climate in this valley, but it's not moderate anymore. We're seeing extreme events, and I can say that I believe is directly related to the removal of critical ecosystems. And if we lose anything up here as well, this little strip, we're going to see major changes. And we're on track to lose this in the next 5 years and potentially lose a massive amount of our forest here in the next 10 to 15 years. We are at a critical tipping point right now, and we need to be aware of it. It won't take long with modern industrial machinery to turn California into another Sinai, and we've got to be aware of it. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about the mechanics of life. This is really what we study in permaculture. It's about ecosystem function, the ecosystem mechanics. How does it work? What are the nuts, the bolts, the gears? What makes an ecosystem work? And we're talking about succession, okay? Forest succession, from bare rock to a multi-dimensional, layered ecosystem, okay? Canopy trees and all the layers in between, with all the animals, all the life, okay? This is something that takes millions of years, billions of years to get to. And let's just look at California. For millions of years, it was one way. And in 150 years, we completely upset that balance. And I believe this is where Roosevelt and John Muir got it really wrong. They looked at nature, created this image of nature, and this is what most Americans and Westerners in general, this is how they view nature as this, this thing that's out there, this, it's its own thing. It was created by God, and it is like an untouched, place. And we really have to get away from that mentality. Nature is about relationship. It's about all the elements that are tending that system. And the Native American people in California, they have been tending this land for tens of thousands of years, if not way longer. in that relationship, active participants with nature, a part of nature, not nature is here and you're there. We are nature, we are part of it. When we step out of those regenerative cycles, those patterns, yes, and we start to interact in a different way, we separate ourselves from nature. We need to understand what's happening. But Native American people didn't tend the entire state or, any large area. They tended around their villages, around their sites. But there are so many other players at work. Let's talk about some of them now. The old growth trees, the mega mother trees, these massive old growth trees. We can't even imagine what this was like. Root systems stretching over, mycelial networks and connections, transferring information. And when they die or they fell over, they housed, countless communities of life forms and broke down, and their roots became compost corridors in the ground and just like incredible, shade and genetic DNA, to spread throughout. These were like the backbone of the structure of the forests back then. Here we had grazing animals in the millions: elk, deer, pronghorn antelope, even bison at one point. And if you go further back, the mastodon. I often look at a small lake or a meadow, and I wonder, was that just a place where a mastodon family used to hang out? We're talking about just 10,000 years ago. We had mastodons, these massive elephants here in California, creating fire breaks and trampling and doing amazing things, mostly in the valley. But see, with all the grazers, you also have to remember there was a lot more meadows in the mountains back then because the forest was more of a patchwork quilt than just a perfect just all trees or not. It was there, and they would have followed it up the mountains. As the summer went on, of course you're going to follow the green, and all the animals did that, right? We had the beaver, millions of beaver in California, all doing their work, breeding dams, spreading and soaking sinking water, creating ecosystems that animals would come in and bring in all their seeds via manure, and just these like massive ecosystems would be born around these beaver ponds. We have no idea how much that contributed to the moderation of water flows up in the mountains. The predators, the golden grizzly bears, all doing their work, spreading out manure, their manure everywhere, bringing in the salmon from the rivers into the forest, just smashing, crunching, and scratching trees, inoculating them with mushroom, beneficial fungi and so many things. The mountain lions, the coyotes, the wolves, even back then, and the predators mainly they were creating pressure, right, on the grazing animals so that they would be in tight packs and they would graze in competition, drop massive amounts of nutrient, all in a dense area moving across the landscape. This is what we try to mimic in holistic grazing methods now. This is what was happening everywhere back then. All right, beavers. Salmon. One of the most important additions to our forests back then, salmon, bringing critical ocean nutrients, these vital minerals and nutrients from the ocean, the only place that it came from, and brought into the forest via bear and coyote and birds and so forth, spread throughout, and then really spread from there on with insects and so forth. Birds, the Feather River here, they call it Feather River because when it was found, there were so many birds on the Feather River, you would see feathers constantly going by the river. We had like just an incredible ecosystem here. All these animals that I mentioned were all doing their work. I keep showing the beaver because, like the beaver was so important. And lots of insects. Okay, and I believe that insects are like one of the higher expressions in any system. They're those micronutrient carriers. They're the ones that spread out. They're the decomposers. They do such vital work that we don't even understand. They're insect frass. Their bodies and all the pieces of it are like just all that micronutrient. And we have like a 90% loss. We've had a 90% loss in insect diversity and population since before colonization. It's been a rapid decline, and it's one of the biggest canaries in the coal mine for what's happening right now. I think we really need to pay attention to that. So, of course, and then underneath the soil, it's a sort of a above and below thing, right? What's happening up here, there's a whole nother universe in the soil, right? This world of microorganisms all transferring nutrients and decomposing and creating structure, disease suppression, and symbiotic relationships. All these incredible things are happening, right? These are the tenders, just like the Native American people collecting seed stock, focusing on taking care of themselves through things like good fire methods, gathering. They provided food for themselves, but also for the ecosystem, right? Through taking care of themselves.
Oh, don't do that. Again, I do not know why it does this. Come on. Oh, I don't know why it does this. Pause.
And so we come to the conclusion we're missing all these elements: the old growth trees, the beaver, the amount of grazing animals, all these things, and they're contributing to these factors. So nature's now trying to rebound with the same mechanisms as always used, but those things aren't there to balance it out. So we have to mimic those missing elements by understanding their function. We can do this through simple ways, through element analysis, through sector analysis, just like I showed you the winds coming in from the high desert, being blocked from the forest. We apply those the same principles, whether it's on massive scale, like what they did at the lowest plateau, or on a small scale. We can design our spaces. These are some designs that I did for post-fire. How do we mimic the beaver by creating our own little dams and ponds and swales and basins, and let's slow and spread and sink the water? How do we make compost to mimic some of those elements that are missing, like salmon, and all the bugs and all the animals that drop their manures and the birds and everything? How do we create ecosystems that then can bring in the life? How can we help better store water? How can we better design our land so that it won't burn, so that we create opportunities for grazing? Here's a design I did. The green represents the grazing area. How can we use goats or sheep to mimic those grazing animals we don't have anymore? How can we move them in cells to mimic the predator pressures that used to be there? How do we add fast-growing trees that then bring in the life that will bring in the native species? How do we create our own islands of life and restoration right out our back door? Just like we talk about in permaculture all along. Using these methods, we can turn our backyard, just like I did down in Orville, on a 3rd acre, collecting food scraps, composting, making teas, and in just a few years, we can turn it into our own little ecosystems. And my biggest lesson here that I've learned over this time is that I was doing the right thing the whole time. I already had an ecosystem restoration camp. It was just in my backyard. And most of us don't have, the time or the wherewithal, the bandwidth to do these massive things. Let me tell you, they really have taken a toll on me and my family, trying to do these big scale projects, okay? And it's necessary too sometimes. And sometimes we have to create models that can be mimicked by larger entities and things, but everybody can do this. Everybody can find a piece of ground, whether it's your backyard or your neighbor or a community park or a local school, no matter what it is, everybody can engage in this kind of activity. And one thing that's really interesting that I learned is, even though in my food forest here that you see, in the background is mostly non-native species that I planted, fast-growing pioneer species, non-invasives. I made sure they were not endemic. They're invasive species, but they were fast-growing non-natives. But it created the structure for life. The compost, the base level of all life here, brought in the insect level up. Trees created the shade for the space. The food kept me there, tending it, working it. I got an immediate reward, right? It's that short-term, long-term yield that we talk about in permaculture. You've got to have a yield. You've got to get something back for your work. It's not just enough to do restoration for this, philanthropic kind of mindset, only volunteering and only giving. You must get something back. That's what every ecosystem, every element in every ecosystem does this, right? We shouldn't be any different. We need that. But guess what happened? After we set up the foundation of this space, then all the native life started to come in, the blue jays and the squirrels and the birds brought in all the seed and life. And now I've got native trees and plants coming up everywhere. I've got a skunk family living in the backyard. I've got so many diverse bird species in my yard and insects that nobody sees around that area. Butterflies and, just insane amounts of life. Bees of all sorts coming into that yard, making their home there. We're making our home there. We're living that ecosystem restoration. And we've spread that around, creating nurseries, giving our, consultations, starting school gardens, giving it to the next generation. And this is what we can do. This is what we can do right now. Go out into your backyard, start to look at that system, go out into your community and look at the system, start to have system thinking and go from balance of nature to thinking about a balance with nature. We can all do this. This is our time. We really, really need to change our mentality into stewardship mentality. We need to be active participants in nature. Our future, our regenerative future, is right there waiting for us. And it doesn't take some big scale situation. We can do it right there in our backyards. So I hope this inspires you. I'm going to continue to do this work. I'm going to continue to, just enjoy my life. My 2024 goal is to really just get more out of life and get more back for myself and my family. I've been putting a lot out to the world and giving a lot. But actually, I'm starting to realize that taking care of oneself is actually the most beneficial thing you can really do. Because if you're taking care of yourself in the pattern of nature, in the regenerative pattern, it's always going to get more, always going to get more. So with that, many blessings. Thank you, Matt, for letting me be part of this. Much love, y'all. Contact me if you'd like to be involved with our workshops, our courses, treetoppermaculture.org, and then the Treetop Eco Camp, and or come on check us out up here in Berry Creek. We've got the new Treetop Eco Camp and the Permaculture Research Institute that we've begun, and we're creating demonstration sites. We'd love to have you be part of it. You can do this. Much love. Have a beautiful new year. Thank you.
I forgot. So busy.